Peace, y'all. It is I, the Energy Master Allah, and I'm coming at you with part 3 of this Decoding the Matrix Workshop. I done told y'all the stories. I done pointed out the signs. Like, y'all still think this thing is a game. So another one of my predictions came true today. So the first one this week, I was predicting that watch Kendrick's Super Bowl performance ended up getting an Emmy since it was on TV. And I predicted that after that, he was going to go ahead and turn the whole thing into a movie and get an Oscar, and then he was going to turn it into a Broadway play or something and get the Tony. And then the day after I say this, you start seeing reports about Kendrick is doing a comedy film, a live action comedy film with the creators of South Park. Now, the significance of this is that the creators of South Park are also the creators of one of the best-selling Broadway plays of all time, The Book of Mormon. So if you're not familiar with that, see, this is the level that it's on. Then I said, okay, so just looking at the pattern, we had Beyonce winning Best Country, we had Kendrick clean up at the Grammys, then we had probably the blackest Super Bowl performance of all times, and then you had Captain America Brave New World coming out this week, and with Anthony Mackie taking the mantle of Cap. And so I said that Captain America will pick up where Kendrick left off. Watch for the signals. That was yesterday. So today, my man's, he posts that Kendrick Lamar's got the lead off single on the soundtrack for the new Captain America. This is, once again, I said what I said before I found out about that. So back to back to back, these signs are adding up to exactly what I've been telling you right now is Armageddon. Armageddon comes from an etymology that actually means literally the oracle penetrates the hill. The hill has this connotations as it relates to Washington, but what we're talking about with the hill is actually, it's more or less what you could think of it as is a psychic meeting ground that nonverbal autistic children and young adults, they connect with. There's a whole documentary on this. Harvard neuroscientist was checking into this phenomenon where nonverbal children were having telepathic links. Like, there's no better way to say it. Telepathic links with their parents that were unexplainable. And so she came and did the testing, and then sure enough found there was something going on. Before even finding out about this documentary called The Telepathy Tapes, I had a similar experience with my son a year beforehand. So I knew that it was very possible, and it was unbelievable that it could actually work. Like, I understood what was going on just instinctively, but it was still just like, wow. And my son, he passed away this past September, and tonight we will be having it's an event at Raw Space in Vero Beach, so downtown Vero, at 6 o'clock. It doesn't start 6:30. We'll show up at 6 o'clock anyway. I think it ends 8:30. And they have a few different musicians. You'll have the Lullaby Band. If you're not caught up to speed, shortly after my son passed, the Carnegie Hall Lullaby Project reached out to me about doing a song, a lullaby for my son and my daughter. And, I barely had to write the song. It just came to my head, and then, they provided musicians to kind of compose it. So that was fun to be able to do. And so I get to perform that. It's the official debut of that song at Raw Space tonight. And we got a little crowd out there. I just left sound check not too long ago. And, it's got me excited about music again, man. Because it's like this idea of creating lullabies is such a spiritual type of process. And anything that deals with sleep is heavily spiritual. And so some of the things we've been getting into with the workshops is really talking about how the subconscious is programmed. And just like how Darius J. Wright has demonstrated a key aspect of how we access the other side and understand what happens after we leave here, it does have to do with sleep. So, check out his stuff if you want to know more about how to do that. But what I've been doing is kind of showing you how that those same things aren't just things that are hearsay from people who have been doing these experiences, but this is something that is woven and underlying the entire physical reality. Like I've shown you in these mathematical constants, I've shown you in various numbers of ways how this stuff, it just penetrates and manifests all of these aspects. And so we're just going to get back into it. Just want to let y'all know some of that stuff. Make sure you like, share, subscribe on the YouTube. I will have the entire workshop, all sessions, uploaded there into a playlist once I'm done with all of that. But without further ado, let me go ahead and get into the whiteboard. Let me switch the camera. Okay, back to our whiteboard. So we got a new, fresh whiteboard. And once again, I'm hoping that everything that is here is enough to complete this this section. If I have to stop and pick up again, then we will. I had to yesterday, but today, all right. So we already talked about Thales of Miletus and what he has to do with this structure of the current 25,000 year Quran period. If you haven't watched the other two, I suggest you watch those and get caught up, because this is a continuation of everything that has been talked about in the past 3 videos, really 4 if you want to start with the Dochi and the Matrix thing, because that's why I tell kind of the background, the story of this interconnectedness of what's happening right now. It is a very, very, very black time, and I don't know about you other folks, but whenever black folks are really, really winning, everybody wins, because all of you are children of the original people. You are children of those first humans that came out of the African continent, the Asiatic peoples who first occupied the Arabian Peninsula, as well as India, and so on and so forth. You're all our children. So when we're doing good, everybody's doing good. When black folks ain't doing too well, ain't nobody doing well. I don't know if you ever looked outside, but that is exactly what happens every single time. All right, but anyways, Thales theorem. So I brought it up in the other video that Thales, he had this thing where he basically determined that when you have, so if you have a diameter of a circle, right in the middle, right across the diameter, there, any other point that you put on the circle will form a right triangle. So the corner of the right triangle, the right angle of it, the 90-degree angle, will be somewhere on that circle. And so why is this relevant? So we talked about Thales, we talked about the connection to blood, and we talked about the connection between electromagnetic fields. Okay, so there's something sneaky happening here. All right, so assuming you're caught up. Okay, so I gave you the example before about if you had a square, so a square that is side length 1, so that means each of the sides on the square is 1. That means the diagonal will be of length square root of 2, and we found this connection between the square root of 2, the blue throat chakra. There's a connection between that and electrostatic and the atmosphere and breath. We had all those connections. Once again, if you haven't caught up, go watch those other videos to understand what's going on with that. All right, so in that first video, I did also talk about how if I drew a circle around that square, that 1 square, then I would have a circle with the square root of 2 as its diameter. Okay, and so basically what I'm doing is I'm taking that idea of breath, I'm taking that idea of static electricity, and now I'm sticking it inside of a dome, inside of a circle. So that is what this is representative of. And once again, like I said before, flat earthers, eat your heart out, because if you want to not sound like a crazy person when you're explaining this is exactly what you need to know. Okay, so if you look at here, you see this one that says mag, and you see this one that says paramag. So that's magnetic and paramagnetic. In the previous video, I talked about how when you tilt the flat side of a cube, at exactly 51.27 degrees, then it creates a golden rhombus. So whereas we have a square up here, right here we have a rhombus. Just imagine that it's drawn correctly, but it has a width that is the golden ratio, which is approximately 1.6180339. I could go on and on. And its height is 1, so it has that unit length there. Okay, so basically what that means is that even though this this diameter is the square root of 2, here in the paramagnetic one, proportionally that ratio is 1 to the height to the width. The ratio is 1 to 5. So that's an important distinction that we'll get into later, because it has something to do with voltage of electricity as well too in the brain, but we'll get into that in the next one. But first we have to get through this. So I talked about how magnetic fields, they have this property where when we have this direct facing type of situation like you have with a square, it is resistant to the formation of magnetic fields, whereas when it's tilted like this, like a rhombus, it takes on paramagnetic properties, which is a property that melanin has. So melanin has the ability to imitate the magnetic field of an incoming magnetic field, like that one from the sun or the one from the earth. So it'll basically, like how you see iron shavings follow a magnet. Like if you hold a magnet over those shavings, they'll like follow it, and you can make shapes and stuff with the magnetic field. Does the same thing here. So your melanin is actually imitating the field of the sun, and as a result, it can kind of translate that information into a microcosmic form that allows for certain processes, including things like disassociating the atoms of a water molecule. So that means that it's able to pull the hydrogen and the oxygen apart in order to be able to use that hydrogen for other processes. And then it can also reassemble it. It can put water molecules back together. So this stuff is more than just the color of your skin. It's almost like a technology that processes sunlight and communicates with that sunlight, which becomes important once we get to the next thing. Okay, so if I have a circle and I have that square root of 2 as the diameter, pi, so we all know pi from school, this math constant pi that has to do with circles. So what pi actually is it tells you the relationship. It shows the relationship between the diameter of a circle and the perimeter of a circle, the outside of this circle. So it's the line that cuts that circle in half, okay? And if I'm taking pi, the formula for that is 2 pi r, and that means 2 times pi times the radius of the circle. All right, so the radius is always half the length of the diameter. So if I drew a line from the middle of the circle, all right, from the middle to the edge, that's the radius. And so 2 times the radius is the diameter. So since I know what the diameter is, which is the square root of 2, all I have to do is multiply it by pi. So I already told you what kind of wild stuff is going on with pi. I already told you what kind of wild stuff is going on with the square root of 2. So what happens when we take that encircling dome and we put it around this number, the square root of 2, that has something to do with electricity in the blood? So mind you, the oxygen that you breathe, the breath that you breathe, it has charges to it because it is aerodynamic. And then those charges, they enter the blood, they're carried throughout the bloodstream, and then when you exhale, there's carbon dioxide and stuff coming out of the bloodstream and reintegrating into the air, into the atmosphere. So in other words, we've got this relationship between the electricity in your blood and the electrostatic that is in the clouds. It's not that far a stretch, okay? It's just all of it's combined into a network. So your breath is combined with everybody else's breath in the atmosphere, but then you take your little bit of it and, exchange information that way. Okay, so when we multiply those two things, you get this number. So the square root of 2 times pi gives you this number, 4.442882938. So I'm going to introduce you to some concepts that I've discovered, and this will help you better understand what's going on here. I don't know what's going on with my daughter in there. She's with my grandmother. She don't like to do things that she's told sometimes. She's on the spectrum as well, so just bear with me. All right. Okay, so anyways, first thing that we want to notice is this 444. So this is a good place. So 444, you can look at that as 4 cubed. So if I have a cube that has length, width, and height that are 4, then we call that 4 cubed. So 4 cubed is equal to 64. A cube that has 4 by 4 faces basically is cut up into 16 squares on each side, and 16 squares times 6 faces of a cube give you 96. Half of that is 48, so that it'll be 48 visible at any given time. Just stuff you should know from math. If I add up 444, that is 12. We got 12 zodiac signs, 12 months of the year. There were originally 13 signs. You could make 13 months if you're using the moon cycle as opposed to the solar calendar. So just some of these basic relationships, because you also see that it's followed directly by 28, which is the length of a moon cycle or whatever. So 4 weeks. So 4 weeks times 7. So that's where that 4 comes from again. So there's a lot of that type of energy going on with this right here. But I want to introduce you to this concept that I call crystal numbers. There may be something like it out there. I don't know, but that's what I've been calling it. And so a crystal number, the way I define it is that, so if you take a number 1 through 9 and you put it over, so I divide it by 9, it'll cause it to repeat. So if I do 1 over 9 as a fraction, then that's going to give me 0.1111111 out to infinity. If I do it with 2 over 9, 2 out into infinity. 3 over 9, that can reduce to 1/3, but we know that 1/3 is also 3 out to infinity. Okay, so we need to look at 2 of those numbers. So 2 of those numbers, we have 0 and we have 9. Now, if I put 0 over 9, we typically look at that as just 0. If we put 9 over 9, we typically look at that as just 1. But what's actually happening there, if you think about it, is if I put 0 over 9, it's just 0 repeating on into infinity. So 0.000000. And I know you may say in your head, well, that equals 0 anyway. But conceptually, if we think about what's really happening there, 0 repeating on into infinity still occurs to us as just 0. So you have to think, is this similar thing happening with the other numbers, to where they may be that same thing repeating on into infinity, but we interpret it as one thing. And in a lot of ways, that is what's happening with reality, because the way crystallization works is that, and the way things become physical, the way things become real, is that something simple becomes increasingly more complex in its internal structure, such that so if you look at everything in the universe of physical reality as an equation, and the faster that equation gets solved, then the quicker it breaks down and it disappears. So if you look at your body as a very, very, very complex equation that the universe has trouble figuring out, that's what gives you time. That's what gives you a long life. If a organism, let's say there's a type of bug that only lives 7 days, well, that means that it has a much simpler equation to solve than yours. All right. And so things can make themselves stay in existence longer by making themselves more complex and harder to figure out. And so so we talked about the 0 over 9. Let's look at 9 over 9. So you were taught that if the numerator and denominator of a fraction are the same thing, that means that it equals 1. But let's look at what's really happening with the number 9. So based on what I just told you, with the number 9, if it's only that denominator, then that means that numerator is repeated over and over and over. So in that case, it would be 0.99999999999 on into infinity. Well, the thing is, you can try this in your calculator. If you multiply, so if I multiply 3 times 1, naturally, that's going to be 3, right? Well, the same thing happens if you multiply it by 0.999999999999999. Why? Because that number is so close to the number 1 that it still behaves as if it's 1 when you multiply it by something. All right. So that means that we have a system where 1 should be the only number that has that particular property of 1, but you can have another number, one of these crystal numbers, 0.99999, behaving as if it's 1. And the reason that's important is because when we bring it over to supreme mathematics, for example, 1 and 9 have different definitions. So 1 is to know, look, listen, observe, and also respect, a body of accumulated facts, the foundation for everything in existence. Knowledge is symbolic of the Asiatic black man. In the case of 9, which is born means to bring into existence. A child is born in 9 months, from mental to physical. Born is to be complete. So if we have one situation where we have observation working as a manner of accumulating facts, and then we have born, this process of manifested from mental to physical, then that shows you that these two processes, knowledge and born, are more or less connected to each other. And in fact, when we have the number knowledge born, which is 19, if we add 1 to 9, that gives us 10. And if we add those digits, it borns back to 1. So that shows you that these two things are very much related to each other. Okay, and so this is the basic concept of crystal numbers. So we have this illusion where we assume that we're looking at 0, but if I had a near infinite number of zeros and then I had like a 1 at the end of that, it would still behave as 0. Or if I had a line of 9s, 0.99999, out into infinity, I wouldn't be able to tell it from 1 based on its behavior. So this is part of the simulation. Okay, so anyways, so whenever I see a group of numbers like that, I assume that they can be collapsed into a single point. So I would treat that as just 1, 4, but by being expanded out this way, this gives me more information about it when I get ready to bring the letters into the mix. Okay, and so in this case, 4, 4, this is dej. So this is an Egyptian word, and you see I have that diacritic up under that D. So whenever you're doing this and you're going to your Wiktionary, you want to try to include, if they have multiple diacritics, like if you can get DD 4, 4, and then it has multiple things with diacritics, like it may have that line under it, which makes that D sound like a J, like a Jed pillar, or there's other punctuation like that. Include all of those meanings, because that means that they're all dimensions of the same one concept. Okay, the important thing is the letters, the numerical association with those letters. And so it just so happens, remember, the square root of 2 involved breath, electricity. Pi involved an enclosure. And so that dej, it means to say, it's a lot more to this, but these are most of the basics, but it's say, speak, think, intend, prophecy. So in other words, we're already having a relationship, because if you look at this circle with this line there and the square as I've drawn it, it looks a lot like the vocal cords inside the throat. So if I cut a cross section across the throat, you're going to see this circular form with a line across it where the vocal cords are. And so when those vocal cords flap flap upon each other as air is passing through it, it creates a static electric charge due to aerodynamics. It does a lot of the same exact things that allow an airplane to fly. And remember, the word fly comes from the same etymology, the same root word as flood as well as blood. Okay, so flow rather. So flow and flood are the most important right there. So flow, flood, by extension, bloom and blood. Okay, so we got that going on. Then once again, if I collapse my D's, all right, then I would get 42 right there. So all those fours would collapse into one thing. We'll just call that a 4 crystal, and then combine it with that T. So that'll give me the letters D and B. It gives us another Egyptian word, Deb. And so, among other things, it basically means horn of the moon. And so, what we're talking about here, when we're talking about the moon, you can look at that as kind of like a crescent. And so, you got the star and crescent, which is involved with Islam. And those of us in the know knows that that's representative of the earth, because it represents the mother as that crescent moon, and then the child as that star. So when we talk about the integration of the masculine and feminine, think of it in terms of a mother being pregnant with a male child, like in the story of Jesus. And so the two of them, that means that the male energy and the feminine energy are occupying one space. Now, the horn of the moon, that word Deb, it's also associated with hippopotamus, because that's a reference to the goddess Taweret. And this whole concept here of bending the feminine to create space, that's exactly what we're dealing with. So in other words, we got this Dej, and then we have Deb. And so basically the idea of using speech to bend the space, the feminine aspect, the space, right? So this already sets a precedent for the power of speech to change reality, right? Okay, and so next, you see you got that 288 in there. 288 hertz is a pretty important frequency, and 288 degrees is like if I draw a 5-point star, the fourth point. So if I'm starting at 0, the first point would be 72 degrees. Second point would be 144 degrees. Hold on. Am I doing it? Yeah. And then add 72 to that, and then that's 216 degrees. That is a number that is relevant to the moon, because the moon's diameter is 10 times that. So it's 2,160 miles across. And so it does have a resonance with that 216. Then we have the 288. Okay, and when I add another 72, and then when I add the final 72 to it, it brings me back to 360. So basically, when I draw a 5-point star inside of a circle, 288 hertz would be the fourth point of the star. And remember, we're dealing with this 4 crystal right here. The number 4 in esoteric circles, it deals with the 4 elements of fire, air, water, and earth. And I described that in another video. 4 also has to do with time, because when you're talking about the 4th dimension, and so basically you can look at time as certain transformations that are happening to the same one thing. So like the seasons that we experience, it's all still the same planet, but it's going through these different seasons based on certain factors that happen cyclically, happens in cycles. Okay, so we already dealt with that DD, that 4-4. We've already dealt with that DB, that 4-2. And now let's get to this 88. So 88 gives you HH, so it's Heh. And that's another Egyptian word. So this is just back-to-back Egyptian words, giving you the impression that the language system was itself based on mathematical principles. And then the Egyptians have proven through their architecture and the different proportions and angles and things that are found in just the Great Pyramid alone, that they did have a profound understanding of calculation, and it would not be unheard of for these things to be embedded in these numbers. Okay, and so that head, it can mean, I reduce it to fire breath, because it literally can mean the breathing of fire of a supernatural being. It can mean heat from the sun. It can mean heat coming off of a bun, like when a fresh bun comes out the oven. That it applies to that. Fever, so just this concept of the heat coming off of it. Okay, and this becomes fascinating because when we look at the other two versions that have diacritics, one of those is it's like a long H, so it's like heck, which means million, and in general it just means something that is of great magnitude. There's a lot of something, and then this one, whenever you see that diacritic up under it, that means that you're dealing with hets. So this would be pronounced kek, kek, like a KHEKH. All right, and so these are the three ways that you could pronounce that 88, right? And in the case of that hek, is throat, neck of a human, which is significant because in order for you to make that heck sound, you have to engage the pit of the throat. So this is directly where the vocal cords are. Now, a fascinating thing about this is, so it seems to be implying that there is a relationship between the heat from the sun and the throat and the neck, as if one is a microcosm of the other. All right, so the significance of million in these mystery traditions, and this also extends to the 120 lessons. So in the solar facts section of the 120 lessons, they give these very specific distances of a planet from the sun. Okay, and so of course that would be 36 million for Mercury, 67 million for Venus, 93 million for the Earth, 142 million for Mars, 483 million for Jupiter, 886 million for Saturn, 1,783 million for Uranus, 1,793 million for Neptune, and 3,680 million for Pluto. Boom! I still remember my solar facts. All right, so these when these numbers came out, people were impressed that they had these fairly accurate approximations of these distances, like way back in the 30s, like when people were still learning how to do this, and only certain people had access to the telescopes and the means to be able to measure it. But what they failed to understand is that these were not approximations, but these were carefully chosen numbers that had extended meaning. So you had to also know something about the supreme mathematics in order to understand what each one of those distances was telling you. Now, mind you, right here where we're saying million is associated with this breath, this heat from the sun. So if you imagine the heat of the sun having to travel a particular distance, when we're talking about that million, you're really talking about how far does that heat from the sun have to travel. Now, in the actual facts of the 120 lessons, one of the items that appears on there is the speed of sound. And if I recall, see, it might be a 6th degree. It might not be the 8th degree, but one of those in the actual facts is the speed of sound, and it is given as 1,120 feet per second. Okay, and so you may not know to do this, but if you think about it, you'll say to yourself, okay, well, I know what the distance is from the sun to this planet or that planet, and now I have the speed of sound. If I divide those two things, so I have two distances, so I've got feet per second and I've got miles here. Okay, and so if I convert these things, if I cancel out distance here by dividing one into the other, then I am left with a time. So seconds. So I'm left with time. And so remember this four sided this four-pointed thing is associated with time in fourth dimension. Okay. And so we're dealing with events. So in other words, if you divide these numbers the way that I've described, and you do those numbers just like what we're doing with this square root of 2 times pi, and you break it down to the words that are in it, I was amazed to find that it basically tells the entire story of our existence on this planet. It's like basically, if you could think of it as there being a handful of key narratives that keep on repeating, such that any event, any major event that happens on the planet, it can be compared to one of these either myths or one of these stories. That's basically what you're dealing with. So it's basically showing that our individual experiences on any given time are just an emergent phenomenon that is relevant to the underlying structure that is already determining what potential types of events happen here. So that's the same as having a computer game or computer program where we're saying these are going to be the parameters, these are going to be the rules of the game. So we got certain events that are inevitable to happen. So these events are demonstrating. So with that million, remember we could collapse those zeros into one thing, because that would be a crystal of zero, crystallization of zero. And the significance of it being 6 of those ciphers is that 6 is equality. So that's our hint. So when we're saying heat from the sun, million, neck of human or throat, we're saying breath, heat from the sun, or quote unquote fire breath, is equality, has equality with the throat and neck of a human. Okay, so that's in there. All right, so let's get to this next thing. Okay, so we have Deke. Oh, you know what? I did that incorrect. So I'm gonna have to check on this one. So we got 293. So give me a moment to correct that, to let you know what BIC should be. So erase that. In fact, I'm gonna have to get another picture. This is why we do this live, so we can work this stuff out. So let me make sure, because it was kind of redundant. I was wondering why that would show up right there. But right now, we about to find out together something even more awesome. So let me get my marker, and I'm going to do it in red so I remember that that is what has changed. Okay, but then 293 should be B. I guess I'm a little dyslexic sometimes, y'all. BIC. Okay, so what I'm going to do, and you know what, I got my laptop here, so I don't even have to try to flip my camera. So you can join along as I'm doing this. And I'm going to hop on my laptop. Shouldn't be anything weird or nasty on here, because this is a work computer, so I ain't got time for nonsense. Okay, go ahead and come on, any moment now, laptop. There we go. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Wiktionary, and so I'm going to show you this process. So this actually works out. We call these happy accidents, because what it allows me to do is to show you something that I hadn't planned on, but is very helpful and relevant. So I'm going to Wiktionary. It already pops up right there, wiktionary.com. All right, and I'm going to show you how this works, so you know how to do this on your own. So I will simply type in BIC. I will look on the drop-down list. It'll tell you already whether that is an actual word. I'm going to click on it. Okay, so you'll notice right off rip, there are a number of languages. Not a whole bunch with this one. It's probably about 4 languages, it really looks like. And so I will look. So which ones would I normally use? All right, so English and French are Romance languages. They're relatively new compared to certain other languages, and so they may be an okay starting point sometime, but if you really want to get to the roots, you want to look for these older languages. Typically, if something in Sumerian pops up, if Yoruba pops up, that's usually a good one. Old Irish is surprisingly pretty good as well, but we'll look at we got some stuff with Arabic too, and we specifically with Chadian, but that is a descendant Okay, so we're gonna check some of that out a little bit. But let's look at some of the meanings we have, and I'll kind of show you how I determine which one is the one that we need to use. Okay, so we'll start from the English. It has this beak, which appears to be a proper noun, and so I can just kind of hover over it, and it's a surname in that particular case. So that would be something I would have to go and look up separately to see what that name meaning is. So that's I might not mess with that so soon. Okay, let's go down. Azerbaijani, they have this etymology of dastardly, illegitimate, sly, cunning, artful. Okay, and okay, so that's interesting. And then let's go down. What else do we have? In French, it is that same surname, but it has to do with, let's see, a disposable ball. Oh, no, see, they talking about Bic the brand. They ought to be ashamed of themselves. And in Old Irish, okay, so it is an inflection of Beck. So let's look at that. Okay, Beck is small. Okay, cool. All right, so that's relevant. All right, so but we want a better match. Like if we could find something in like Sanskrit, or if we could find something attached to just one of those older languages, that's usually your better bet. And so we've got this right here with a diacritic over it, an accent. It is, what is this? To beat, to hit. Okay. To kill, slaughter. Oh my gosh, there's a lot of stuff. So to beat, to kill, to hit. Okay, and then we got this other one with a different diacritic, to whip. So we got these words that are meaning to beat on something, to strike something. Okay, and then sly, cunning, artful, intricate. Okay, and then I saw something you saw. Okay, there it is. This is the one that descended from it. That's in Arabic. So Arabic's always a good Arabic, Hebrew, that type of stuff is always a good idea. So let's see what that is. Okay, that's still talking about the ballpoint pen. Okay, cool. So hit, strike is the most common one. My curiosity is killing me right now, so I am real quick gonna look up what the surname Bic means. So simply type in Bic name meaning or origin. So I got Bic name meaning. And then let's see what we get. So Bic is a friend. Nah, they still trying to give me the dad blasted company name. Let me see. Maybe I could do surname. Let's see, surname meaning S-U-R. Let's see what we get. Okay, that's much better. So it comes from a word meaning hardy or strong. We also have one from Old French meaning fawn or fallow deer, so a little deer. Deer shows up in a number of languages as being synonymous for slave, or as, in some cases, as even a bodhisattva. So like a person who was going to become a Buddha at some point. All right, so let's see. We got from High German, we got a pickaxe or a chisel. So that goes right back into that idea of hitting and striking and whipping. So I think that's the one we're going to go with. So this is the basic process you go through is when you have these multiple meanings, you kind of looking to see what's most common, get an idea for how it went through its transformations, and then this gives us a better idea, like getting kind of forensic with what might be communicated in this number. All right, so let's go back to it. So Bic, so we want something to the effect of a hitting or striking, and it appears that it extends to the tool for hitting or striking. Hit, beat, and then I'm going to put in parentheses a tool, which is convenient because the next word that we end up with is a plow. So we're still talking about the tool. So hitting, striking, so plowing. We're right in that neighborhood. We had a chisel, a pickaxe, a plow. So we are in the right neighborhood here. Okay. Good. Okay, so we did good. We did good. Thank you for helping out there. It's just like watching Sesame Street or Blue's Clues, right? I said, I didn't do anything, motherfucker. I was just watching you talk about some stuff. Okay, that's fine. All right, so anyways, so now, so this doesn't hurt anything, trust me. Okay, so we got 293 gives us beak or bick, which is dealing with beating or hitting a tool. And so an interesting thing about plowing is that the Egyptians, so from this 82, so this final number we have, this 82, that gives us HB, and the Egyptian symbol for plow, it is also symbolic for seed in Egyptian. Okay, so basically we got this idea of this hot breath from the throat beating the seed. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Now the symbol for that first one, the Heb, is it basically means an enclosure. So you have an enclosure, that leg looking thing. It means to like be inside of an enclosure. And then the final glyph, the one that looks like a plow, that's just telling you that the glyphs before it are describing that thing. So it's basically you get the description of the hieroglyph, and then you get the hieroglyph itself. Okay. And so it's saying it's something that is inside of an enclosure. And so if you look at that enclosure looking thing, it kind of looks like a spiral. And so you should already be thinking of chakras. Why? Because when we're talking about seed here, we're not just talking about any old seed. We're talking about seed sounds. So each one of the chakras has a seed sound or bija sound that is associated with it, which is for the root chakra. The red one is lam. For the sacral chakra, where the womb would be, is vam. Remember I had to use my brown marker because I don't have a yellow, but then that's in place of yellow. So for my solar plexus, the sound is ram. For the heart chakra, the green one, that's yam. And then, so I'm directing sound in each one of these places as I'm saying it, because that's the place that you want to vibrate it. And here we have chum. For the third eye, om. And then for the crown, it's basically the same thing, but it's just exaggerated with the spine extended. So we got seed sounds. So in other words, so far, well, we'll do a full breakdown. Let me finish the HB. So with the diacritic, just like we had Heb, now we have Heb with a long H. Basically means festival, which itself comes from a word basically having to do with joviality, which is joy. And that's going to be relevant in a second. I'm going to get into that in a minute. Okay, oftentimes when you see jovial, that is actually a reference to Jupiter. So Jove or Hove is another name for Jupiter, who is associated with Zeus. And remember, Zeus is the god of thunder and lightning and whatever else. And when we talked about the square root of 2 in the other video, we talked about Adad, who is the Babylonian Sumerian equivalent to Zeus. Okay, so it seems to be implying that we are not just looking at any seed sound, but we are specifically addressing one dealing with Jupiter. And as far as our body is concerned, the heart is associated with Jupiter. Okay, so the heart is associated with Jupiter in the 9 chakra system, the match 9 planets. Would I place that somewhere else? Let's see, Saturn at throat, Jupiter at the heart. No, that's perfect. That's perfect. Yes, we'll play, and part of that reason, because just like we have a solar plexus, but we still associate the heart with the sun. You can look at that as a central sun, because Jupiter serves as a second gravitational point that kind of protects the inner planets because of its size. So it keeps asteroids and stuff from hitting the Earth. Asteroids from the asteroid belt. Okay. So that, just keep that in mind when we talk about the heart. And so last video, I broke down how voice is sent into the solar plexus such that it then radiates to the heart to create that ooh sound, and that becomes the sustainer. And then it loops right back around to the throat when we're chanting om. Okay, so this appears to be what is being represented here. And last but not least, we have that Heb with that last diacritic, meaning to dance, and it is said that the etymology of it has to do with bopping up and down. So when we talk about hitting and beating, it appears that we're talking about the movement of vibration. So a hitting, a beating, a up and down vibration. Then there is an extended, so the glyphs on that basically means a sieve, so inside the sieve. And then you have a person that's dancing. So what they're saying is, okay, so in like the Dogon traditions, and which is an extension of Kim in Egypt, they would preserve their beings, their dry beings, by placing them with inside sand. And then when they were ready to use the beans, they would use a sieve to sift out all the sand and then get the beans. And so they use that as a symbol to explain the process by which woven vibrations become particles from massless waves. And so this is where we get that dance. We get the dance of the waves, and then now we're sifting out those things that are solid. And so basically we get this etymology of to recover seeds. So the HB altogether is basically recovering the heart seed. So that Yam. Yam is also associated with the god of death in Hindu mythology, Yama, who was basically killed, destroyed by Shiva, the supreme being. And so what that's representing is that process I was just talking about of you sending voice into the solar plexus such that you can vibrate that heart chakra and then return it to the throat to create that circuit. It creates a standing wave that sends sound through and vibration through the whole body. Okay, and then that Ram, it is associated with Brahma, the architect, the creator. So he's sending that sound to him, such that he then sends it to Yam, which is also associated with Vishnu with that position. So the Godhead, the sustainer, the sun. So basically, this continued theme of heat from the sun. And so this shows us that this action of the breath and the throat is actually all geared toward making that connection with the heart and the heart field. Okay, so that brings us right back to that fourth chakra, dealing with the heart, dealing with that Jupiter energy. Okay, so let's talk about some of this stuff that's happening off to the side. Okay, so that 88, that number 8. Okay, so if I look at this figure, and then I also drew here, so Deb, that Horn of the Moon thing, it also has the glyph that is a serpent and a hand. And so what that means is the serpent can mean word or membrane, and we're talking about to say, to speak. But also remember, a membrane is something that separates two things. And so to give a membrane deals with exactly what we were talking about with Horus in the previous video, such that you're giving something form such that it can operate separate from the overall field. So when I'm sending sound into a particular place, I'm concentrating sound in that place, and I'm concentrating on whatever type of energy is associated with that area. So that's basically what we're doing. We're creating a membrane, isolating that one place, and it's called a seed sound because something grows out of that. So a particular energy signature grows out of you sending sound to that particular place in that particular way. And then it helps to kind of guide and manage the emotions and the biochemistry, all these types of things. You're basically doing internal alchemy. All right, so if I have one of these squares, so we want to look at this as, okay, so the diameter across that circle is going to be equal to this. If I did a vertical line here like this, so those two lines would be the same length, so that one would be square root of 2 as well. And so it becomes a little easier. So whereas I've got the 90-degree angles of the square on these corners here, if I cut this into 4 places, I also have a 90-degree angle here, 90-degree angle here, 90-degree angle here, 90-degree angle there. And so I could look at that as representing points out here. So that would be a line across there, a line across there. So I've got 8 points. And so that brings us to this symbol here. So in Sumeria, they got this symbol for God, Dinjir, which has these 8 points. You see 4 of them are darker than the other. So that shows 2 sides of this duality between masculine, feminine, whatever the case may be. Okay, so this also appears, you also see a wheel, you also see this inside of a circle representing the Dharma wheel in like Hindu and Buddhism, such that it tells you how to act correctly, how to live, and the actions you take in life to clear your karma and be able to advance spiritually. Okay, so these concepts are overlapping here. I talked a little bit about how the pyramid, the Great Pyramid, when it's looked at from above, and if you look at it with the right angle, you can see how the faces of the pyramid are dented inward, such that you actually have 8 lines instead of just the 4 that make the edges of the pyramid. Okay, we come over here. So when we take that Dinjir and you put it inside of an enclosure, because remember we've been talking about putting stuff inside of an enclosure, it gives us Amma, which is the symbol for mother. Okay, so mind you, mother, the feminine aspect, is associated with blackness, and Amma is also the name of the supreme deity in the Dogon teachings, and so it represents this point of perception. So apparently, what it's saying here is that this thing and that star and crescent are basically saying the same thing. This concept of the child inside the mother, and so God, as we've distinguished in the other videos, once again, you should have seen those already. God, the original etymology of that means that which is invoked, the meaning to send voice in. And that's what we've been talking about this whole time. This idea of doing chant and then sending voice into the body in order to vibrate these seed sounds. Okay. And so it looks like we've got a consistent type of operation going here. All right, so the mother, so we're sending that sound vibration into the enclosure. So the voice of God. So when God interacted with Mary and Jesus is being made and born without physical intercourse type things, what we're really talking about is the sending of the vibration of the all into an enclosure such that it can have a physical experience. Okay, so there's another symbol. So you basically take this and you add the symbol for G behind that, and you get this concept Amaji, which literally means return to the mother, but it has to do with freedom. So it was a symbol of manumission. Now, this is something I haven't heard anybody else say. Maybe the Igbo History Museum, they touch on this, but the cuneiform marks on the tablets, on those clay tablets that you find in Samaria, they resemble the ritual scarring marks that they do in Africa. So in West Africa, those marks, they told you what tribe you were from. And from what I could gather, it would seem that you had certain markings that let people know that you weren't supposed to be enslaved, that you were royalty. So if they caught hold of one of those folks, if they enslaved somebody that wasn't supposed to be enslaved, there was hell to pay for it. And so the only reason I think I even figured this out is because on my wrist, on the inside of my wrist, see if I can get it in there on the camera, I have the tattoo for the symbol wind. So this is Fu or Kaze in Japanese. And, you know, my last name, my government is Wyndham. And so we call ourselves the Wind Clan. So we were the Wind Clan ninjas. And there was an evolution of the cuneiform, the symbols in Sumerian that helped to inform the creation of the various symbols in Chinese. So if I turn my tattoo to the side, you'll notice that it has a lot of similarity. It's got that thing inside of the box, and it's got those double lines right there. So it's very similar this wind symbol as well as Amma. And so the significance of that is that the symbol for wind in Egyptian, the god Shu, is actually a star inside of an enclosure, inside of a circle. So it shows that there must be some kind of shared lineage with that. Now, Amma represents the point of perception. And then remember in our last video, we talked very much about how when you are focusing point of perception on massless waves, that is what begins the process of matter being created. And so matter comes from the word that means mother. So the feminine aspect of the universe, that which is in motion, that which provides material experience when the masculine acts upon it. Okay, so once again, it looks like we're in the right neighborhood. Now, this emoji symbol, that it deals with freedom because, like I said, it was a symbol of manumission. When you were freed from duty, freed from slavery or whatever, you had this symbol. And there is a group, like I think it's a libertarian group or something, that has co-opted this symbol, but this is the origin of it, and I don't know what they done made it mean, but that became the symbol for freedom. Now, Amagi is also considered to be cognate with Amajig or whatever. So this is the name of the Berber peoples who occupied North Africa and Libya. And according to Laird Scranton, the author, it is very likely that that word actually comes from joy of Amma. So remember, joy was dealing with jovial, and then we had Amma, who was their mother. So this concept shows that we're talking about this enclosure that has something to do with sustaining in the heart. Okay, so all of these concepts are coming together. So the heart is being the fourth of seven chakras, is the one in the middle. So it tells you that the point of perception that we're talking about most likely has to do with the heart. And we know that the heart creates a toroidal field for which that heart would be the center of it. So it's the center point. So you could look at it is creating the enclosure that it is in. So this is the concept of Father, Mother, Son, this Trinity, where the Father is creating his own self in the physical. All right, by first making an enclosure to be inside of and then growing within that closed system. So this is describing that entire process of the mother archetype. Peace, Sharon. I see you. Thanks for joining. We're talking about this mother archetype and we're talking about this child archetype. So when we're talking about returning to the mother, is for us to have been out of it or been in ignorance, and then returning to understanding and manifesting that experience. And so this is the joy, this is the celebration, the festival that is being had when we remember who we are and we return to that knowledge of ourselves, that wisdom. Remember, the woman is represented by wisdom in the supreme mathematics. And so wisdom is your ways and actions that one uses to make his knowledge known, such as speaking wisely to wise the dumb and dumb. All right, so that is symbolic of the woman. So we have this whole process that we've described of using the voice to send it into the body, activate these bija sounds in the chakras, particularly the heart. And this allows us to return to the memory of the mother, the point of perception. And the reason that is important is because it gives us a unified view of what's happening around us. When we return to the mother aspect, that black aspect, it gives us an insight into all those who came after. So all the children of the earth, we have to go back to the motherland and remember that original understanding. So all of these underlying meanings were programmed into the esoteric practices that originated in Africa, were inherited in the Middle East and India, and then finally passed to the Far East, to China. And then all three of those things were combined into the system that we essentially understand to be Christianity, and it was transmitted through the ancient Romanians, which are the Dacians, and through their relationship with the Romans, and as well as the Etruscans, who were connected to this lineage but had forgotten their heritage. There's a big story behind that. They went through a similar process, because remember the word slave comes from Slav in the first place, so they were enslaving Eastern Europeans, and they went through a similar process to what we as African Americans went through, where because they were enslaved and they were being disconnected from their culture, they forgot who they were connected to and where they came from. But the fact of the matter is, they're actually our light-skinned cousins. They came from a similar lineage, and because they forgot that, that's kind of been wiped out. So this is the reason why Hitler, in addition to Jews, was targeting specifically people like blacks and gypsies. Like, where did gypsies get into the mix? That's why, because the Romani, the gypsies, are the cousins of the West Africans, specifically because those who migrated out of sub-Saharan Africa initially went up to the north to the Levant. They mixed and mingled. They had all kind of humanity up there. They re-migrated, returned to the mother, back into Africa, and then so the lighter skinned Arabs and Egyptians and people you see like that occupying Saudi Arabia and Egypt now, those are those ones who were in the Levant and came back in. And so, like them, whenever that migration happened out of Africa to the north, you also had the migration that led to the West Africans. So those populations in West Africa that stayed independent and relatively untouched by the mixing that was happening outside of Africa, they too are related to the same people that those who went to the Levant are. So in other words, like the Dogon and folks like that in West Africa are direct descendants of the sub-Saharan Africans who are the ancestors of the current Egyptians. And it was just one of those things that because of the way history played out, they forgot that they were cousins. They didn't look like each other color-wise, so they thought they weren't related to each other. And so that's been the source of contention for a lot of the problems of throughout the past few thousand years. All right, so just know that. Okay, so that process there. So Amazigh, all those, we explore the connection between those. Now that we know how to activate that heart, the heart has a certain type of memory. It's attached to that toroidal field, which is resonant with the field of all of existence. And so Alma is that first point of perception. The heart gives us a holistic view that is attached to the right side of the brain. So the right side of the brain takes in all signals that are coming in, even the stuff that you don't pick up. So that includes the subconscious mind. And then it's the left side of the brain, the masculine part, that breaks it up into language that you can understand. And so the only way that these two hemispheres are able to really communicate with each other is through symbols. And so depending on what your understandings are of the symbols around you and the pattern recognition you have, is going to determine the connectivity and the communication between the subconscious mind and the conscious mind. So we pick up on things all the time, but unless we can read the signals, our dreams, our visions are useless to us. And so that's why these old ancient traditions, these mystery traditions, these secret initiations, all of that is about training you on the various symbols. All the mystery traditions are teaching the same thing, but in different ways. And it all stems back to this original connected tradition that is associated with the Dogon, the Dakon, and the Dragon, or whatever. So that is the connection between the black, brown, and yellow original seeds. And once again, we combine those into a simplified version that is essentially what became Christianity, and it's what we gave to the Greeks when they were living in caves, and so that helped them to build themselves up. And they wove a lot of those teachings into their myths and things of that nature. So they were initiates. When the leadership, particularly like the popes and stuff like that, when the Romans wanted to control everything, they started cutting Europeans off from going down into Egypt and Africa and getting these initiations to learn the meanings of the symbols. So that's where you started getting kind of the abuse of the religion, and they started to write and change things and change characters to benefit their agendas. And we still see something like that happening to this day, where these sacred documents, these important documents that we use for our structure, have been corrupted, been perverted for their means. And Same thing happened with democracy. You had several of the Greek philosophers who spoke out explicitly about one of the inherent flaws of democracy, particularly when they didn't, I don't believe they used the word capitalism, but basically that sort of thing, because the Roman money was, a big thing. And then the Dacians, the Dacan, when they were being invaded by the Romans, one of the first thing they did, and the way that they kind of conquered them, was that some of the Dacians, they wanted wealth, and so you can see how the same narrative is playing out right now with the Kendrick and Drake feud, where you got the ones who are protecting the teachings, but then you got the ones that look like you to some extent who will go and take the bag and do things for the check. And so that happened with the Dacians as well. And so once they were hooked on the money side of things, that basically had them as well, like kind of shaping what they were saying and what they were doing around what would be profitable. And so you basically had the equivalent of capitalism creep into the democracy that was established in the Greco-Roman traditions. And so Plato and other guys like that spoke out, and they said any situation where people can vote and have a majority and the wealthy have more influence, then it's always going to be disproportionate, and then you will always end up with slavery. So you'll have some form of slavery always come about as a result of democracy when it is coupled with capitalism. They knew that when they came over here and created this country. That's the reason why they became Protestants and wanted to get away from the Catholic Church, because Queen Elizabeth, especially Queen Elizabeth II, has started outlawing slavery in England, and then they had the Commonwealth of Nations that was created so that former British colonies, they could have the resources they need in order to build themselves up and, be able to be independent. And naturally, the U.S. was not one of those countries that joined the Commonwealth, because they knew what they were doing. They understood democracy. They're obsessed with the Greco-Roman traditions and wanting to be conquerors and all of that stuff. And so they created a situation that they knew for a fact would result in slavery and in a democratic system that makes it seem like we all have a fair shot and that is equal. But in actuality, because capitalism is also a factor, the rich will always be the masters over the poor, unless, of course, the poor refuse to participate in the system that is giving them their money in the first place. So that's the catch-22. All right. So what is this other stuff? So we're dealing with the heart, and the last part of this, I want to get into the heart space. So this heart space. Okay, so we've got this, we talked about these diameters of it and this intersection between these 4 points, and how the corners on the inside blooming out into the ones on the outside basically make this 8-point star, which we associate with God, which is invocation. So sending heart in. So I'm sending sound into the heart because there are neuron cells. If I have heart brain coherence, which means that I've done the necessary steps to coordinate my breathing and my heart is communicating clearly with my brain, I can use sound to map the field of the heart, and it will actually allow me to begin to actually visually perceive in my mind the various information that is coming from the heart. And so how this works is closely associated with the golden ratio and the Fibonacci sequence. So if you don't know what the Fibonacci sequence is, it's a sequence where a number will be the sum of the two numbers before it. We see this pattern in all of nature. It forms the spiral in shells, the spiral of galaxies, the proportions of your body. We see it everywhere, and it is because it is an organization or normalizing principle around which all things converge or try to converge on the golden ratio. And your deviation from that golden ratio will determine how in sync or not in sync you are with the rest of the universe. So we're all connected in that way. Okay, so the Fibonacci sequence, it typically only goes positive. So from 0, I got 0 plus 1 equals 1, 1 plus 1 equals 2, 1 plus 2 equals 3, 2 plus 3 equals 5, blah, 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 blah. And then, so if I do that 12 times, I essentially get up here to 144. So, that's an important number in the Bible, and it is a factor of this 288 we were talking about earlier. So 2 of these gives me 1 of those. Okay, and then I added 233 because each of these things, we want to deal with them in pairs. In order to get a Fibonacci number, I have to take a number and divide it by the number in front of it. And so as I go down this line, that number gets closer and closer to 1.618. The phi ratio. So down on this end, 2 over 1 is just 2, which is an estimate, but it's not that close. 3 over 2 gets us a little closer with 1.5. 5 over 3 gets us even closer with 1.66666. So it keeps on getting closer, going up and down like a vibration. Remember that dance, going up and down. So I noticed something. So if I want to go in the opposite direction, so this is a spiral that is opening up. So that is growth. That represents growth. I say, well, what if I want to go in the other direction? It is not enough for me to simply just put a negative sign on all of these and expect to have the same thing. Because actually, if you do that, you'll get this line right here, this quadrant right here, where it's basically just going to be that over here. So it's going to be identical to this. Okay, now I'll explain what that is in a minute. But that's not what we're looking for. So what we really want to do is, so if 1 plus 1 equals 2, 1 plus 2 equals 3, we can do that in reverse. We can say 3 minus 2 equals 1, 2 minus 1 equals 1. So if I keep that pattern going, 1 minus 0 equals 1. 0 minus 1 equals negative 1. 1 minus negative 1 gives me positive 2. So I can keep on going in the opposite direction. So you'll have the same numbers pop up, but you'll see that it alternates between positive number and negative number. So essentially what that does is, which I'll explain in a minute, is it kind of breaks it apart to show you where on this coordinate plane different impressions are happening. So, but I'll explain it in just a moment. Okay, so anyways, was there anything else I wanted to add to that? So let's go over here anyway. So if I'm making these pairs out of dividing a number by the number in front of it, then I can look at that as the slope of a line on the coordinate plane. And so if you remember from high school geometry, the number that's on the top is the rise, which means the y number, and the one on the bottom is the run, so that is the x number. So if I do that for each of these pairs, so if I'm just going from 0 in the positive direction, it will form this structure right here. So I couldn't really, only did like some of them. I didn't do all of them, just enough to be able to give you an idea of it, because like the smaller ones, it just makes little tiny circles right here, but then it starts to spread out here. So if I go out, so if I so I'm going up to 89, now 144, that's for the angels. Like you hear in all the stories that's beyond what we experience. And if you look at the old Egyptian hieroglyphs of them like walking up a wall at a 90-degree angle, this is basically what they're talking about, because each one of these sections is 90 degrees of a circle. Well, it just so happens that when I do 89 over 55 as my rise over run, it is going to give me something that touches the circle that will be formed around this coordinate plane, which is 90. So normally when we look at a coordinate plane, each one of those lines goes on into infinity. But what this is telling us is that for our physical experience, for the most part, we are enclosed to 90. And so anything beyond that we experience as being infinite. And infinite means to go on forever without end. Okay, and so there's a distinction between infinity and eternity. Eternity actually has more to do with vitality. So the vital body being connected with the field of everything, whereas this idea of infinity is to extend one's time forever. So there's no end to your magnitude. And so this concept actually deals with the heart. The relevance of the heart here is that it appears that these traditions of yoga and stuff like that were designed so that a person who does not have the same connection with the sun through their melanin, like dark-skinned people do, can actually manipulate the field of their body, the magnetic field of their body, to behave in a manner that is similar to how black people's skin works. So it wasn't that there was hatred for the white people, because like the Moors, they showed up in Europe and they helped them get out of the dark ages by showing them how to use soap and how to quarantine and things of that nature. But then the Dutch turned around and used those same principles of quarantine in order to be able to establish a perception of racial superiority and be able to isolate dark skinned populations. And we use that same sort of situation. You saw it happen during COVID. So once again, America ain't doing nothing new. Okay. Anyway, so gave those particular techniques so you could have a connection with the sun by accessing your inner sun. Since you can't really just get information directly from the regular sun because you'd burn up. Okay, and so part of the significance of that is because the triglyceride levels in your body are affected by the amount of melanin in your skin. That's a fascinating connection right there. And it does have to do partly with the exposure to sunlight, because, you know, we get our vitamin D from sunlight. And so vitamin D is related to cholesterol. And so the ratio between your cholesterol of the heart and the triglycerides in your system, a healthy ratio is below 2. So you will find that every single one of these ratios, 1/1, 2/1, 3/2, blah, 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 represent an ideal balance between the cholesterol and triglycerides in your system so that you do not develop heart disease. So this relationship between infinity and eternity is that they were looking for ways to extend physical life. And this is actually where you get the legends for vampires and stuff like that, because that's very tied to the Dacians, because the Dacians are the ancient Romanians. And of course, Transylvania is associated with Romania. All these stories of werewolves have to do with their myths of a person that was turned into a wolf by their chief in order to protect them. You got the story of the vampires. This has to do with extension of life. And so the vampire mythology is related to the Christian mythology, because when the Romans were basically getting the Dacians interested in money and things, they were introducing concepts of extending the life. And so our spiritual journey is not to extend our physical life here, but to enrich our physical life, however long it is, long or short it is, such that we develop the tools that we need while we're living that we can use after we leave here. And so otherwise you'll just go somewhere by default based on whatever your charge is at death. But if you can consciously interact with that process, you actually do have control over whether you reincarnate or not, whether you become involved in the creative process, helping to create dimensional spaces that other souls can enjoy. So you can basically build other simulations that souls can go to and play that game, if you will. Okay. So anyways, we had these traditions that we taught the Caucasian people, because their skin wasn't able to do what ours did, and that was by design, so that we could see what we could be and other ways to express ourselves. And naturally, when you have to teach somebody else, it helps you understand something better. Okay, so I got about 10 more minutes. I'm gonna wrap this up. Okay, and so when we separate it, so what we're doing here essentially, so this is the heart field, we're separating it. So if you look at this as our full reality, so if we think of this x-axis, this horizontal axis, as being space, and this axis right here as being time, the y-axis, this basically shows how things grow and expand and how events are connected. There's a rhythm to it, there's a flow to it. Now, if we separate that, we realize that it isn't just inherently one thing, but if we take the positive ones and the negative ones and we separate that out, you'll see that half of these circles here are mirrored down here, and then the other half are mirrored over here. So over here, you see these two are congruent, and right here you have the big one that's congruent, the one that's touching the circle, the limitation. So what these represent, if this horizontal axis is space and the vertical axis is time, basically what this is saying is that it interacts with space. So time axis is interacting with the time axis in a positive way, meaning that it behaves the same way as it does in the way we perceive it. But in terms of physical space, it's imaginary numbers. So it's imaginary space. So this is the space of the mind. So just like in your mind, when you're awake, you still perceive time passing, but none of the things that you're thinking are interacting with physical space directly. All right, so that's where that side of you operates. So it's primarily you interpreting electrical signals, not physical impressions from the outside. The reverse of that, we have a situation that is related positively with this thing up here as it relates to space, but it's related to time in an imaginary way, so in the negative. So what does that represent? Well, more or less, that's the past. So you can look at this as the present and future, but this is the past. So we have things like, I'm looking outside. Everything I'm looking at is a structure that was built some other time ago. If I'm looking at my neighbor's house, that is a set of actions that were completed years ago, and this house that's standing here is the remnant of those actions. And so the past is always interacting with us in the physical standpoint. And for instance, your memories and your biology, your the information from your ancestors are still acting on you in the present through your DNA. So this allows us to separate what's happening mentally from what's happening physically. So once we see though how those two things interact, which one of these numbers they interact with directly, then that gives us some insight into how these two things combine, how the imaginary and the quote unquote real give us a shared experience of our human reality. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to show you, I'm doing pretty good, I got 6 minutes. Okay, is that if you notice the numbers that come out positive on this side, now that we've separated the things out, we got 1, 2, 5, 13, 34, 89. Okay, so this number 125, it jumps out at me, and then 13 as well, and I'll explain that in a minute, because it is something I see commonly pop up, and it pops up in what's called the Mandelbrot set. So the Mandelbrot set is this equation that this guy Mandelbrot popularized when he noticed that when you use this equation in a computer program, it created these beautiful fractal geometries, and it started to give insight on how our universe could be a hologram of fractalized geometry, such that you have one thing, but then you have that thing broken up into smaller and smaller repeating patterns and pieces, sort of like what I was explaining with the crystal numbers. So basically something that is simple, keeping its form, but becoming more internally complex with this internal crystalline structure in order to give it longevity. Okay, now the Mandelbrot set is interesting because just like it makes those cool geometries that are very associated with the Fibonacci sequence, when all the numbers that aren't included in that set, when they come together, they form what they call the Buddha-Brot set, because it forms this shape around the around it that looks like a Buddha, or it looks more closely like Ganesh, the elephant god. He's really a Ghana, but the elephant god from India. But they the creator Julie or something, I think they just ended up calling it a Buddha Brat because she just thought it looked like a Buddha because it has like the little knot on the top of his head and all of that. It looks just like a Buddha. So look that up. Mandelbrot set and the Buddha Brat set. But anyways, the way that it works is basically, let's say I'm taking the first number. So when I plug it in, let's say I'm starting with 0. So for here, I'm doing function of C is going to be 1. So that means C equals 1. And this number is going to be based on its position. So that means that when I put a 1 in here, let me start with 0 because we're going from the line here. So 0 is the same here. 0 squared times z, well, 0 squared is going to give me 0 plus 1 is 1. So that's my first number. Then from there, I take the number that I get from there and I plug it in. So I take that 1, plug it in. 1 squared is 1 plus 1 equals 2. I take that 2, I plug it in. 2 squared is 4. 4 plus 1 equals 5. Now, that gives us these first two. Now, something interesting happens right here because if I plug in that 5, it gives me 26. So 5 squared is 25 plus 1 is 26. 26 happens to be twice this 13. Okay, so we've got this relationship between 1, 2, and 5 such that we have a doubling when we get to 13. This is displaying. I kid you not. So if we look at 0, so we got a point, a line, two-dimensional object, 5 points, 26. So 26 is the number of letters in our alphabet. 26 letters in our alphabet, 5-point figure. What do these two things have to do with each other? Well, we'll get into it more in the next video because it is relevant, but the proportions in a pentagram of this line to here and this line is the golden ratios, the Fibonacci sequence. Again, even better yet, if I put 26 letters across here, 10 will fit on this arm, 6 will fit in the middle, and 10 will fit on this arm. 10 to 6 reduces to 5 to 3. 5 to 3 is one of our ratios, so that is a Fibonacci number. 5 to 3, more importantly, is the ratio of the spiral of the DNA. So our DNA has a 5 to 3 ratio. So that shows that our blood, our DNA, is associated with the same sequence. And this symbol proportions letters, which means 26 vibrations, 26 impressions, have that same relationship. So it's reflecting what we're seeing here with sound, speech being sent into the body in order to have certain effects. So when you think of magic or something like that, it's not that you're sending sound out here, making changes to the physical environment out there. What you're doing is you're changing your own electromagnetic field, which has resonance with other people so that it can also have an impact on theirs. And depending on how they understand words and meanings, it could activate certain emotions that create certain effects within their field. And then when there's enough resonance between enough people and as a collective, because our breath and those electrical charges are attached to the atmosphere, it starts to actually more strongly cause events to come together. So when this joins with the necessary thought pattern, this is what's called Tantra. So in Hindu thought, Tantra is when you have these pre-existing thought forms that match up with the sound that is appropriate for it. And when those two things get together, we get Tantra, which is basically the sex relationship between light and sound, image and sound, such that, so image is child and mother. So the two things come together. This is the pregnant mother. So this is the image appearing within the womb. It has been proven that if you apply an electric field to the outside of a vacuum, so if you create a vacuum in a lab, if you introduce an electric field to the outside of it, it will start to form particles inside of it. So you could think of our world as being a dome that an electric charge is being applied to from the outside such that physical particles form on the inside. And I'm going to leave you with that, and that's going to take us into our next video where we explore these concepts of how programming the inside of you using words and letters actually manifests the reality that you're seeing out here, and how if you're not the one doing that programming, somebody else is, and that is the simulation. So I think that's enough for you now. Let me go give my daughter her medicine, and I will see you tonight or not at Raw Space Lullaby Project, premiering my son's song, Sleepy Sounds, and it is very inspired by some of the stuff that I've been teaching you in these lectures, and I hope this has been informative, and I'll see you next time. Peace.